Now I talked about accessing data a little bit earlier on, so let's go through the choices on that. And there is quite a lot of choice, and these are just some screenshots of what files and folders look like after this data migration. And the first way of accessing OneDrive is very, very similar to the way it always looked. So what you'll end up with in your My Computer, in your Windows File Explorer, is something which looks very much like it used to look. So those old letters, those old personal drives will have gone and be replaced with a fluffy blue cloud called OneDrive, and then your school next to it. But essentially, those yellow files and folders that you're used to can still be used. And then there's another version, another way of doing this, which is via the browser. Not surprising, because this is a cloud model. So Microsoft 365 has its own website. You just go to office.com. It's literally that, office.com, and log in with your email address and your password. And if you follow the links to the OneDrive app, very easy to follow. You can access your data that way. So again, normal files and folders just on the web. And then the final way is via Teams itself. Now I know I talked about Teams as the new shared area, and it absolutely is that. But also, if you log on to Teams, go to the File section, go to the OneDrive section, you can get to all of your personal yellow files and folders via that route as well. Okay, so just to summarize, you can access OneDrive in Windows, you can access OneDrive on the web, and you can also get to OneDrive via Microsoft Teams. Please do just think of these as 3 different windows to exactly the same files and folders, exactly the same data. And staff can very, very happily use all 3 and intermix, that's fine. But it might be an idea, particularly for your more basic users, just to use and tell them about one way of doing it, just to simplify and make life easy for them. Moving on to the shared spaces then, there's also similar choice. Now I know I talked about Teams being the new shared area, but all of those choices that you have with OneDrive also apply to Teams. Okay, so you can also access shared areas or Teams via Windows, via the File Explorer. So underneath OneDrive, you can see I've got also another set of folders, and these are my shared folders. So it can be done that way. Equally, you can go to that website I mentioned before, office.com, and get to shared folders that way. But the real power of shared areas, and particularly new Teams, is to use Teams for shared area. And I'll try and talk a little bit about that now. The main reason is that Teams, yes, provides shared files, but it also provides what Teams calls posts, and this is kind of chat or instant messaging in the team as well. And through the lived experience, we have found in our schools and our central office teams at United Learning that if you combine the conversation around shared documents, the example on the screen there is just a case study that 3 or 4 of us were writing. That combination is a really, really powerful combination, and has brought us many benefits in terms of communication and collaboration. Let's touch on the point around moving the data, because I said there were some choices there with respect to that, and there are. Now, there are 2 methods. One essentially is this first one, which is getting your IT team, your IT support team, or your central IT team to do that for you. Now, even with that method, there are still some things that you should ask your non-technical, your teaching and support staff to do. They should certainly have a clear up. Why move things that don't need moved? Back to the point around teams, if you're making new shared areas, they should certainly have a think about what new teams that they need. You will need to communicate with staff and tell them that this is happening, including the when and when CPD will be happening. And after the move is made, your end users do know their data, so they're the best people to feedback on anything that may not have worked. And then on to your technical teams. What should they be doing? Well, they should be thinking, back to the first few slides, about a backup before they make this move. They should be thinking about setting up OneDrive and Teams technically, and that single sign-on environment that I talked about at the start. But then it's going to be them that actually move the data on behalf of your end users. And the main benefit of that is that all of that could be happening in the background, and when you're ready to start using the new data, they will just log on to the new tools, and the information that was on the server is now in the cloud environment. There are standard Microsoft migration tools that technical teams should understand and can use to do that. And then they should also be involved in the archiving of legacy systems. It is important to turn off the old way of working at some point, and potentially, if somebody feels they've lost something, just providing a little bit of ad hoc support and ad hoc access should users need to get back to the old world to find an old file. So that's the central way of doing it. Now, there is another way, which I call the DIY or just do it method, which is getting your end users to do it. But again, there are some responsibilities for both your technical and non-technical staff. So just moving through those quite quickly. All of those things, bar the last one, down to CPD, staff should still be doing. But in the DIY method, and I'll talk to you a little bit about how that would work in a second, it's actually the staff rather than the technical teams that actually move the data. And there are a few advantages of that, and not least they can just get on with it and do it themselves, and they know their data well. And they will still need to check things afterwards. But again, technical teams still need to think about those backups, to think about the setup of the environment, including single sign-on, to think about archiving systems and after migration support. So how would staff do it? It's pretty simple, really, and this does work reasonably well, particularly for small primary schools. Other big secondary schools might want to employ the central teams to do it. But if you want staff to move their own data, this is kind of how they do it. So if you're on the web, office.com, you're either going to OneDrive or Teams. At some point you get to this screen, and within that screen there's an upload button, or indeed you can just drag and drop files and folders into there, and that will quite simply take a copy of the data that was on the old personal area or the shared area and gets it up to OneDrive or Teams, and that's a perfectly good way of doing it. Another way of doing it, this is slightly more involved, perhaps better for some of your slightly more advanced users, is just open to Microsoft File Explorer Windows. So you can see the one on the left hand side there has my old shared area. The one on my right hand side there has my OneDrive. They are highlighted with blue, and you can simply drag and drop or copy and paste, just like you would do anyway, and move the data from one place to another. Now, both those methods, the web method and the Windows method, will take a bit of time, and the crucial factors are how many files and folders, how much data are you moving, and what's the speed of your internet. But that is a way of doing it. And my final point is this: as soon as that data's moved, that will mean that you have the potential to use a variety of BYOD, or bring your own device. In other words, staff personal devices to access this data on top of their school provided device. The screenshots on the screen there are just an iPhone, but many other platforms and devices have OneDrive applications and Teams applications. You can see the notification on the bottom right there. Now, it's perfectly okay to do that. In fact, it's quite a good reason to do that. In other words, you can make benefit of devices that staff already have, but I would urge you to revisit or write, if you don't have one, your bring your own device policies. Schools should be thinking about potentially allowing staff to do this, but staff should not be sharing devices around with other family members. You need to make sure that your security on these devices in terms of passwords or fingerprint and face recognition is absolutely watertight, and even perhaps think about 2FA, so two-factor authentication. In other words, staff literally logging on twice via a couple of methods, multi-factor authentication, when they're using their own device away from school. So those are just some tips for that. Do give that some thought before you make this change, because staff will find out very, very quickly via their own app stores that they can download these apps and log on and accessing school data, which is absolutely fine, but you do need to make sure that that data is secure.